With thousands of aircraft taking to the skies on a daily basis and millions of passengers on board, there's nothing more important than safety. For many people, stepping onto an aircraft is a huge leap of faith. The fate for two Boeing airplanes turned fatal as falling from the skies became a reality. The horrific incident was one aviation disaster after another. Today, we're questioning what went wrong with the Boeing 737 MAX and who is there to blame. Stay tuned for all the answers. What happened? If it ain't Boeing, I ain't going, were the words the entire aviation community swore by. However, in the span of 6 short months, with 2 aircraft plummeting to the ground crashing, the decades of trust put into Boeing and their aircraft came shattering down. How did the aviation giant lose everyone's trust? And where did things go so terribly wrong? The horrors of the incident are still as fresh and terrifying as ever. With nearly 346 passengers and working crew deceased, and just as many families shattered, the twin tragedies stemmed from the same negligence. The first crash, on October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 was scheduled to take flight from Soekarno-Hatta International Airport in Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, and land at Depati Amir Airport in Pangkal Pinang, Indonesia. Unfortunately, the aircraft never made it to its final destination, and only a brief 13 minutes after takeoff, it came crashing down into the Java Sea. None of the 189 passengers on board survived the crash. This was the first major incident taking place with a Boeing 737 MAX, a newly introduced aircraft by the aviation company that was launched nearly only a year before this massive tragedy. This accident marked the highest death toll associated with a Boeing 737 aircraft. It was also the second deadliest aviation-related accident in Indonesia's history. As soon as the situation unfolded, the Indonesian government initiated a search and rescue operation to recover the debris from the aircraft and the bodies of those who had been on that flight. The remains of the tragic incident were scattered with a debris field 280 kilometers wide. That's nearly a whopping 175-mile radius. The second flight, suffering the same fate, came crashing down only 6 months later. On March 10, 2019, for Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, things started to spiral out of control 90 seconds after takeoff. A sensor on the nose of the 737 MAX 8 had malfunctioned and triggered an automated control system. Panic swirled in the cockpit as things got out of the pilot's hands. With audio and visual warnings flashing, the pilots tried to stabilize the aircraft, but the aircraft's automated system overrode them. The pilots staggered to gain control of the aircraft for the next 4 minutes. Then, after panic and disarray, the airplane took a nosedive and crashed into the ground at a blinding speed of 575 miles per hour. The crash carved a hole in the ground which was nearly 32 feet deep. Naturally, none of the passengers or working crew on board were able to escape. This fatal tragedy cost the lives of all 157 on board. What events unfolded? With hundreds of families in mourning, these tragedies brought shockwaves internationally. After the first disaster, one would expect Boeing to own up to their mistake and ground all 737 MAX aircraft. However, nothing like this happened in history, and all international airlines continue to operate the aircraft, carrying passengers around the world. The aviation company tried to shift the blame onto the pilots involved and blamed the incidents on human error. However, the more than qualified and trained pilot got it right. In either case, none of the pilots involved were to blame for these tragedies. Boeing also tried to play the incident off as negligence on part of the airlines and as incompetent stereotype third-world operations, being the reason why so many people lost their lives. The company tried to make it seem like everyone was at fault except for themselves. Boeing refused to take any responsibility of the malfunction until the second Ethiopian Airlines aircraft system's failure. The question arose, was the new 737 MAX the rock-solid marvel of engineering that Boeing led everyone to believe it was? In both cases, the same sensor malfunction was the reason tragedy struck. The investigations conducted in the United States brought forward that Boeing had not included comprehensive instructions about the MCAS system within pilot manuals or in recurrent training. The company had purposefully underplayed the impact of this system in its communication process with the United States Federal Aviation Administration. One of the most shocking findings from the investigation was the utter misconduct that occurred. Representatives at Boeing definitely knew that their latest aircraft released had the potential for disaster. The report released after the first crash stated that the FAA and Boeing were well aware that the aircraft had the potential of coming crashing down nearly 15 times over the course of its lifetime in the skies. Boeing set itself up for a huge and highly expensive scandal. They were working on a way around their faulty MCAS system and were hoping to keep things under wraps. Boeing was banking on the fact that nothing would go wrong before they would implement it. The callousness and negligence going into this decision goes to show how high profit margins and good image meant everything to the company, even at the cost of human lives. The legal battle. After the dust settled, the surviving relatives of those on board decided they were not going down without a fight. With hundreds of souls lost, the wounds of this tragedy weren't going to heal so easily. Families of the victims had turned to the courts to hold the aviation giant accountable for its gross negligence that cost hundreds of lives. No one was going to let Boeing slip past this mega scandal. They're facing criminal fraud charges related to the crashes of their 737 MAX airplanes that occurred in 2018 and 2019. The U.S. Department of Justice has accused Boeing of deceiving regulators and customers about the safety of their airplanes. They claim that this was done by withholding crucial information about a faulty automated system known as the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS, which was found to have played a key role in both accidents. A long list of charges is being leveled against Boeing in connection to these incidents. These include conspiracy to defraud the United States, wire fraud, and making false statements to regulators. The company has agreed to pay a fine of several $billions to settle the charges, the largest ever imposed on an aircraft manufacturer. The settlement also includes an admission of wrongdoing by Boeing and the implementation of a compliance program to ensure that such incidents do not occur again. Boeing took a huge financial hit and was made to pay nearly $2.5 billion, $1.7 billion of which went towards airlines that had purchased the 737 MAX aircraft from them. Airlines were compensated for not being able to use these airplanes as they were grounded for 20 months after the second crash. The company also distributed $500 million in compensation to the victims' families and incurred a fine of $243 million. The agreement also stated that Boeing would really have to bring some changes to the way things were being run. This meant major changes in safety protocols and procedures. These reforms would also extend to the corporate culture, which has to be shifted from a profit-first to a safety-first mindset. The hearings are the first time that Boeing has been made to answer to the fraud charge within the public's court. The judge presiding over the case said that the victims in the crashes were crime victims and must be involved in settlement negotiations. Families of the victims claimed that the deal Boeing struck with the Department of Justice to forgo the criminal charge was insulting. The sweetheart agreement was a shameful violation of their rights, and the company should be held responsible for having endangered so many lives repeatedly. However, the Department of Justice stuck with its decision and deemed the settlement amount appropriate. No direct, indisputable proof existed that a direct connection existed between Boeing's wrongdoings and the two incidents. As part of the deal, Boeing admitted responsibility and refused to reopen the agreement once again. They claimed that such an action would be unworkable, inequitable, and unprecedented. Within the court hearings, families have laid down their list of demands and suggestions regarding how the incident should be dealt with. They urged the judge to appoint an independent monitor who would overlook Boeing's compliance with the deal they made and ask for public proof of these efforts. What the families want is simple: accountability. It's still in the gray whether or not legal action will lead to the agreement being laid wide open again. Chicago lawyer Robert A. Clifford, representing the families, said doing such a thing would have major consequences and create ripples within Boeing, with action being taken against even those at the very top. He stated that families want no stone left unturned in this investigation, and the maximum penalty is being imposed against Boeing for its gross negligence and careless way of dealing with human lives. Will things actually change, or will these great tragedies be swept under the rug? How far will giant companies and corporations go to raise their profit margins, and how many lives will be risked in the process? Stay tuned for more aviation news.